Welcome, everybody. We're glad to welcome you on to our From Research to Implementation webinar series here. We have a great topic today. This is a little different than we normally do, and I'm excited to share this information with you guys. So today's topic is ground tire rubber used in asphalt pavements, and it really comes down to some lessons learned from the Alabama scrap tire program. We've got a couple different presenters today, and I'll go ahead and get you guys introduced there. As always, is Nathan Moore with us. He is the Assistant Director for Test Track Operations here at NCAT. Prior to that role, he served as a research engineer in the laboratory here, working a tremendous amount on friction, balanced mix design, and all things asphalt mixture. Nathan is very busy this time of year as he tours the United States, sharing the good word of asphalt with people from all over the country. I believe he had some wonderful North Carolina barbecue this week on that trip. Next to be Dr. Carolina Redesno, who's an associate research professor and lead researcher here at NCAT. Her focus is on asphalt material characterization, BMD, WMA, RAP, GTR, ABC, and 123 for those of you that are Jackson 5 fans. But also into recycled materials in our different asphalt mixtures, pavement design. She earned her PhD and her master's from Arizona State University and had her BS from civil engineering that she got at Catholic University of Nicaragua, bringing both technical depth and practical perspective into advancing asphalt pavement performance. Adam Rhodes, uh, pun intended, Adam Rhodes, Asphalt Roads, if we did that on purpose. So Adam Rhodes serves with the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, or we call him ADEM here. It's the scrap tire program that he's over in the materials management section there. His work supports the scrap tire management and project development and the beneficial reuse of tires across Alabama. He's recently updated ADEM scrap tire program rules and grant provisions with the intent to expand the productive use of scrap tire materials. Adam brings the state agency perspective and how recovered tire materials can be removed from our waste streams and look at the disposal challenges and put them into practical infrastructure applications. So, given that, couple rules for those of you that have always been here, welcome back. For those of you that are new, we'd like you to keep yourself muted throughout the presentations there. We're going to open up the chat box. We would like your questions in the chat box, and we will get to those after the presentations are done. Given that, Nathan, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Travis. All right, everybody. Those of you who are, familiar, you are frequent attendees to our monthly webinar, you don't need to know this, but those of you who might be joining us for the first time, especially since we have a newer topic, we're mixing things up today. Normally, we have an introduction from research from NCAT's perspective, and then somebody from industry or agency, who talks about things in the real world. But we thought it'd be a good idea today to swap it so we could better understand ADEM's recycled tire program, and then have a Carolina talk about applications of rubber and asphalt mixes. I'm going to reiterate what Travis said. These webinars are only as successful as the chat is active. We really love whenever you guys are posting questions. Please, please, please get your questions even in the middle of the content. Go ahead and start asking questions. Sometimes one of our subject matter experts will hop on there and answer it quickly. Other times it's just a really good food for thought. It's good for us to maybe have discussion at the end. So please, please, please get your questions in as soon as you have them. First things first, and if you don't get anything else from this webinar, this is the number one thing that you need to know. You can ignore everything else, but this is primary importance. This is GTR and this is RTR. Okay? And we're not RTR. We're GTR. And if anyone disagrees with me, you can argue with a wall. So honestly, the webinar could be over right here.
War Eagle, baby.
So I think that there's plenty more to be said, but if you don't know anything else, it's GTR, not RTR, and I don't care what anybody else says. With that being said, though, uh, ground tire rubber, GTR usage at the test track, we started this going all the way back to 2009. However, the process was limited to terminally blended, the wet process, terminally blended asphalt modified or rubber modified asphalt binder. Carolina and Buzz, they wrote a really nice synthesis. I'm showing it here. This is INCAT report from December of 2023. I don't have the in report number on there. That was my mistake, but you can find it on our website. But it's a really nice synthesis from 2009 to current, about all the times, all the sections on the track that have used some form of recycled rubber or ground tire rubber. So. But keep in mind, when we first started this, going all the way back to when Missouri DOT sponsored a section on the test track, it was using terminally blended wet process rubber. The dry process, though, started in 2021. That's the first time that we actually used dry rubber, blended in, blown into the plant, through a feeder machine, blended in with the outer shell of a double barrel drum, for the purpose of putting on the track. And so we did this with two mixes on the NCAT test track. The additive group, which I'm not going to steal any of Carolina's thunder, so I'll just sort of just making the highlight here. And then Oklahoma DOT also sponsored a test section looking at the use of rubber in dense graded asphalt mixes. That's the key. I mean, some of these we've done wet rubber with open graded. We've done it with gap graded. We've done it with dent. Now we've done it with dense graded, obviously. But the dry process, it started with dense graded mixes. Since then, we've put it in SMAs and gap graded mixes. And so, yeah, since 2021, we've evaluated five different dry GTR sections. I believe it's five, two in 2021 and three in 2024, using three different rubber suppliers. So a couple of them have been used multiple times. I'm going to be quick on the lessons learned. This is really my personal experience, lessons learned. Here we have a picture of our friend Doug Carlson with Liberty Tire as we were producing a section for using their product in 2024. Make sure the rubber doesn't clump when you're pumping it. This is normally not a problem as long as it doesn't get wet. But if it does clump, it might not pump through the hose. And I'm showing you a photo there of where the hose is introduced into the dust return port on an asphalt plant. That's not usually a problem. Like I don't want to make it sound like this is a bigger deal than it has to be. But if these products are kept dry, it usually takes care of itself. On the lab side, though, these products can have a different effect on volumetrics than what you may be used to. So this is a pill that we compacted to 62 millimeters, and I have this little dowel bar that I made years ago as a reference point, and you can see it just kind of expands just a little bit. So you got to watch out for that. Watch out for rebound or expansion. Carolina may talk about some of that in her content. I'm not sure if she has planned for that or not. But as a former lab rat, this was a phenomenon that you had to learn how to address. It's not impossible, but you had to learn how to address. With that, I'm really interested to hear more about what Adam has to say. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Adam, I'm going to kick it over to you. And if you would share your slides and go ahead and get started.
So with the tire program, what we have tried to do is to enhance and enable more recycling in the state for tire material and scrap tires in general, because what we're trying to do, of course, is to get them out of landfills. We have too much of this material going to landfills, and of course, it's basically never going to rot. It just sits. So we hope to eventually maybe be able to recover those tires as things progress. So a quick look for the overview. Efforts and accomplishments since the program was transferred from the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs, which is the department that did have it prior to us. And then it was transferred to us back in about 2008, 2009 area. Then we'll look at the marketing program summary, and then some of the projects that we have. We've had many different types of projects. RMA, the rubber modified asphalt projects, are definitely a lot newer than what we have been working with. Previous projects have mainly been dealing with playgrounds, the basic process tire material for walking tracks, schools, parks, and such as that. Then we're trying to move further into an in-use market development program. That's going to be our latest um, grants that we have available. So the program was established to demonstrate all the beneficial end uses of tire material, because we try to show the public, as well as agencies, cities, counties, what all the material can be used for. For example, the bonded rubber mulch, that type material has been used a lot for the walking tracks. It's also going to be in your playgrounds, such as like McDonald's or Burger King. You'll see that type bonded material that is used, and it's generally very durable. All the sites that I have viewed in the past, that's been in for several years. Some upwards of 10 years now. The material is still holding up very well. Then, of course, is the rubber modified asphalt, and we'll look at some of those projects here in some of the following slides. The poured in place recycled tire material, that's going to be the walking tracks, playgrounds, and such as that. And then, of course, the recycled tire mulch, which is just the basic recycled tire where generally the wire material is pulled out. So you have maybe not necessarily crumb rubber, but small chips. And then that's used in flower beds and can also be used in playgrounds, landscape mulch, and such as that. The program is, what we're trying to do is bring awareness to the many different uses of tire derived products. We have tried to support research and demonstration of end uses, such as with NCAT. We did have a grant with them where they were looking at that was, I'd say, one of our initial grants for RMA was with them, to look at the use of it, the different capabilities, and trying to show ALDOT, Department of Transportation, all the different uses and potential uses of it. The grant process is a competitive open grant process. So right now we do have several grants, and of course funding is always limited. The RMA projects are generally fewer, just because of the cost of them. We generally have a lot more of the smaller type projects, which is the recycled tire mulch and the bonded rubber mulch. Since 2011, the program has granted over 14.5 million for the implementation of the tire marketing demonstration projects across the state. The projects not only provide environmental and economic benefits in their application, but they have also improved many communities through these products, especially with your school playgrounds and walking tracks, which people find very beneficial for joints and all, versus walking on, you can imagine concrete sidewalks and asphalt and such. Over 57 of the grants have been issued to local governments, and those are totaling more than 9.5 millions in awards for recycled demonstration projects. And the projects have included the walking tracks, RMA, playground, landscaping, and we have had a few of the splash pads. Those are generally fewer because of cost. Those are going to be a lot more than just your basic walking track and such. And some of our other projects are newer projects where we've tried to show the uses of recycled tire products. It's going to be the injection carbon optimization with SSAB there in South Alabama. It's in Axis. It's an electric arc furnace And the material and what they were trying to do there is show the potential replacement using recycled tire material for petroleum coke. Some of the benefits was safer and more environmentally responsible alternative carbon source, and of course, the recycling of tires. For the process, it substituted chrome rubber for pet coke while monitoring the steel quality, furnace efficiency, emissions, and the operational impacts. The results were pretty positive. There were no issues with the steel quality. The furnace efficiency was maintained, and the emissions were within acceptable levels. So that's one of our projects where, and like with a lot of materials, you're trying to show all the different uses and potentials, because you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket, especially when you're dealing with tire material and tire products, because one market drops, then you need to have options for the sale of the material. The funding for the project was through the dollar per tire fee. The total grant amount was $361,000 that was awarded. Some of the results for the testing was the chrome substitution was from 5 to 30% versus the pet coke. And then you see the monitoring there, and then the different emissions, which according to them, there were no major issues with emissions coming from that material. Current usage there, the 7,000 tons of injected carbon, and then the 25,000 tons of charged carbon annually. And you see the potential offset for that material. Then we get into some of our RMA projects. This was one of our first ones here, which was Gunnersville State Park. And that is some of the RMA material there. They had received a grant from us for that. The additional RMA paving was also accomplished there at the lodge and the main parking area. That was funded by the Department of Conservation. So they were also helping out with the cost, because at that time we were not able to completely fund that entire project. So they were able to take care of the rest of that. And as you can see there, the National Center for Asphalt Technology, NCAT, they did provide the training and mix design services, and they are also evaluating the performance. These are some of our other RMA projects. As you can see, we have had several across the state, and then we will potentially have others in the future. With most of these projects, NCAT has been involved either through mix design assistance and are monitoring the performance over several years with reports to the department. And those reports, of course, are then shared with ALDOT for hopeful further implementation from them. This was one of our earlier grants, probably our first grant with RMA, and it was with NCAT, and it was RMA there used at the test track, and Carolina might have some more information on that. Another use for the material, bonded rubber mulch, was used for a walking trail here at the department. The trail is a 1/4 mile long, and it's used by employees and the community. We've only had good results from this. Most of the community has been able to use it and enjoy it because it is a lot easier to walk on than concrete or asphalt. It consists of shredded scrap tire material. This material is generally just large chunks of tires that are cut down and the wire material does have to be removed. And for that reason, it can become quite expensive. Just having to process a tire and get it down to wire free can be pretty costly. This particular project did use over 1,600 scrap tires. This was one of the splash pads that I was discussing earlier. The city of Prattville, we were able to grant them some funds for the tire material. Then, as with a lot of these projects, they're able to get funding from other sources for the rest of the project, whether it be the fencing and other parts of the project, because we only grant funds just for the tire material itself. Another use for it, which has been a really good application, is for the septic field media. We did have a grant program for that. That's no longer effective, but during the time of its use, we were just trying to show these companies the potential uses versus the usual material, which is going to be gravel. And most of the companies that did use it did have good results from the use of it versus gravel material. Other projects, we've had a lot of these playground projects. Now, this is just the loose material here. We also have another material, which is the poured in place material, or the solid type material that's used in a lot of these projects. This particular one was for the Department of Conservation. I believe this was Oak Mountain State Park, and we have had several of these across the state. Now, this is the poured in place type material at the City of Tuscaloosa's all-inclusive playground. Last I visited this site, that material is holding up very well there at the playground, and we hope to see more of these, but these are a costlier project versus just the loose fill type material. So our newest program that we've been working on is the End-Use Market Development Program. These grants are going to be for the processing of tires across the state, from large material, say 6 to 8 inch pieces that could be used like for backfill and such as that against retaining walls, all the way down to potentially RMA type material. It's very expensive to take it down to the RMA material. So what we like to see is a lot of these facilities that are going to be using it in the larger pieces, generally for also tire-derived fuel. Tire material can be taken and used it's used in several cement kilns across the state for fuel, and that has been another good use for recycling of tires. For this particular program, it's just going to provide for partial reimbursement for the processing of tire material. It's going to be not going to be similar to the other grants in that respect. And then the eligibility is the tires do have to be generated in Alabama, and because we don't want, of course, paying for tires coming from out of state for the processing of those tires. We're just trying to get the tires here, which we have plenty of, recycled. And then other requirements is you do have to have a in place a contract for the sale of the material. So we just don't want to see the material piled up and not used. We do want to see it used.
My part of the presentation is going to deal specifically on how we've been working with ADEM to have projects built with GTR in the state. So that's going to be a little bit of the discussion that I have for you today. The outline of the short presentation that I have, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about background on the use of ground tire rubber in asphalt pavements. Nathan already provided some initial thoughts about where we are with implementation. I'm going to discuss why adoption has historically been limited, and some of the things that we are doing moving forward and hoping it will help in the implementation efforts. This is particularly related with balanced mix design. I will then review the Alabama BMD special provision that we are using for these projects that are being sponsored by ADEM. We'll discuss the support that NCAT is providing to make those projects successful. And then I finally going to go over one of the case studies, kind of breaking down the tasks that we have for each of those projects. Briefly at the end, discuss the current research that we are conducting with GTR, and then finally some concluding remarks of the work that we've been doing. So this is some general information, but we know that ground tire rubber has been used in pavements for a long time. And the main reason is that you are trying to improve performance of your pavements and at the same time eliminating scrap tires that at the end will be contaminating the environment. There is vast information that tells us that if properly designed and constructed, rubber modified mixes can perform well, and they can provide several benefits, improving the rotting resistance of mixes and also help to prevent several types of cracking in pavements. Historically, the wet process, and here I'm going to make the distinction in wet process, asphalt rubber, and terminal blend, two different processes there that are considered wet, have been very successful for several decades. But what is the issue? Why the adoption then, if these projects have been so successful? Why the slow adoption of the technologies? So despite these success stories over the years, there are several barriers to adoption of ground tire rubber that include early performance issues in the field. Believe it or not, historical information from projects that were built in the 80s are still in the back of the minds of several people that feel that they should not go that route. For some of the wet rubber applications, such as asphalt rubber, very successful technology, we know that you're going to need a special blending units on site. So that's something that typically is not desired. Issues with storage and settlement, and also in the case of asphalt rubber as well, the inability to apply the current binder and mixture specifications. On the right, I'm providing some information that was published by NAPA regarding the use of, I'm going to make the clarification here, ground tire rubber. They are referring to ground tire rubber here as RTR, but Nathan already spent a little bit of time explaining why we are going to continue with the acronym GTR.
That's right.
But what I'm trying to show here is that these are the states that have been using ground tire rubber over the years. Mostly, as you can see, California is the bigger user because they have a mandate that requires to put certain number of tires on pavements. You see usage in other states, but that usage has not been consistent over the years. You see some years people are using certain number of tons, but then one year they don't use any. So once again, going back to that slow adoption or reluctant to use the technology. More recently, modern dry process are coming to with a different way of doing things. They differ significantly from the way dry ground tire rubber was used in pavements. Back in the 80s, dry rubber was used as an aggregate replacement, and the experience that people had at that time was not really good. The dry process has been modified over the last several years to include other additives and also to come up with particles that are smaller in size than the traditional dry process that was used in the 80s. In this case, when you are adding the dry rubber with a small particle size, the rubber is actually in the mix has a modifier. So the smaller particle size allow the rubber to interact with the mix during production. So adding the rubber dry overcomes some of the limitations of the wet technologies. You don't need the special blending units. You don't have to deal with these issues with separation of the rubber. So it's something that is creating some excitement, I would say, compared with what we know from successful experiences with the wet technologies. The dry rubber is delivered in super sacks, and you have to realize when you are feeding the rubber during production, you are going to need special meter systems, but they are not that different to what you will be using for fibers when you are producing SMA or open-graded mixes. So now the discussion how balanced mix design may enable ground tire rubber implementation or help with that reluctance to use ground tire rubber more. The increased use of recycled materials and other modifiers, such as ground tire rubber, particularly dry ground tire rubber, has increased implementation interest in BMD. So when we are designing a mix using this approach, you are trying to achieve that balance between rotting and cracking resistance rather than relying on the conventional mixed volumetrics that are specified with the super pave method of design. So as indicated in this schematic here, pretty simple way to look at balanced mix design. And of course, depending on the balanced mix design test that you are selecting, you will be designing your mix to optimize the performance of that cracking and rotting test. So if you are looking here at this plot that I have here on the right, if you look at the quadrant in green, is where you are achieving that right balance because you are meeting the rotting and cracking criteria that has been previously established. Since balanced mix design tests the mix rather than the individual components, it incentivizes agencies to use technologies such as dried GTR. So moving forward, and I'm going to get at some point with these projects that we've been doing here in Alabama. Alabama DOT has selected for implementation of balanced mix design two tests, the cracking test, in this case, IDLCT, and for rotting evaluation, the HUD IDT. These are tests that have been widely accepted by other agencies as well because of their simplicity and also good correlation that has been found between with this test and field performance. Alabama has a special procedures for this test. So if you are looking at the cracking test or IDLCT's Alabama DOT 459 test procedure, and for the HUD IDT, that will be procedure 458. So what you have to realize, and it's one of the biggest challenge when we are implementing balanced mix design, is that agencies will have to establish, once they select the performance test, they're going to have to establish thresholds. In the case of Alabama, the initial thresholds that were derived from work that was actually conducted here at the NCAT test track, primary from cracking group study that was conducted several years ago. So in the study, we use mixes from different composition, and what I'm showing here in the bars are results. If you're looking at the blue bars, I'm showing results of IDLCT when the mix was reheated, plant-produced mix, and then the orange bars are results of lab mix, lab compacted samples. So these sections were placed and they were monitored for a certain amount of time. And at the conclusion of the cycle, what was found is that the mixes that you see highlighted there in red were the ones that cracked first, had the most, the amount of cracking was the highest, followed by the mixes that I'm highlighting here in yellow. The remaining mixes were either they didn't have any cracking or very, very small percentage of cracking. So at that point, the initial recommendation was to use an ideal CT of at least 40 when you were designing the mixes, looking at these numbers that were available, and during production, having at least an ideal CT of 30. Something that I'm going to point out here, since we are talking about GTR, when we were looking at this additive cracking group experiment, the bars that you have here are a gap graded mix using the Asphalt rubber technology, which shown the best performance of all the mixes, no cracking after 20 million E-cells. So Alabama has developed, as I say, that was the starting point of developing a criteria for performance tests. Since then, Alabama has developed a special provision looking at ideal CT. So that was what I show you was the starting point, and what they came up here is some numbers looking at ideal CT for design and production based on the traffic levels. So in this case, for low traffic, they are specifying an ideal CT of 55 during design and 50 during production, and these numbers go up as the traffic level is increased. A similar criteria has been proposed for hot IDT, having a hot IDT at 50 degrees. The number has to be 20 PSI or higher, and this is applied to all traffic levels. With that, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the NCAT support on these ground tire rubber projects in Alabama. So as I was discussing previously, the ADEM scrap tire program provides grants to incentivize and promote the use of ground tire rubber. As he mentioned, there are other grants that are given to other applications other than payments, but in our case, I'm going to be focusing on those grants that were given to build payment sections with GTR. So once again, local and state agencies can submit proposals to build projects that incorporate GTR in payments. Let me just minimize this window here. So the way it has been working for these different projects, these agencies are applying for these grants, subcontracts NCAT to help with different activities as part of the construction of these sections that include some pre-contract phase. We help with mixed design, and finally we do monitoring during construction, and we assess performance over time. Once again, the goal of ADEM is to have documented field performance of these GTR projects that support hopefully a broader implementation of GTR in payments. So once again, getting into some of those details, NCAT for all these projects that I'm going to list at the end of this presentation, NCAT supports several activities. The identification of locations to place a control mix and GTR, so you can see if any improvement is achieved with the use of the GTR. We also help in some instances, we haven't done this for every single project, but we conduct what we refer to as pre-project BMD training. So the potential contractors can have information about how they have to comply with balanced mix design. We also work with contractors to verify or develop mix designs that will meet the Alabama DOT BMD criteria, because that's the only way we can ensure that the mix will have good performance in the field. Once again, another activity that we help with is to monitor and document mix production and construction of the test sections. We also sample mix that is being produced, and we verify it. We conduct BMD testing here in our facilities to verify compliance with performance requirements. And then finally, as I mentioned previously, conduct field evaluation over time. So this is the list of projects that we currently have in the state, and I try to create a map indicating the locations of the different projects. So we started with the oldest project that we've been monitoring is a project that was built in Coffee County that was constructed in October 2020. So this will be year 6 for this project. 2 projects were constructed. I think Adam mentioned one of these projects in Lake Guntersville and the Soto State Park in 2021. We also have a project in Joe Wheeler State Park that was built in 2023. Lake Yahoo has a project with McClellan as well, built in 2024. Annie Road in St. Clair County in October 2024, and then the most recently Lake Lorleen State Park that was built this year, and it's anticipated that Chihuahua State Park will also be paved with a GTR mix this year. Something I want to point out when we are looking at the evaluation of these projects, the length of these projects vary. You go from projects that are relatively short, a couple of miles, to projects that are up to 11 miles. So keep that in mind as I go over the performance, the current performance of these projects. So once again, this is a case study on how we've been handling this collaboration with ADEM. This was the Coffee County project, once again from 2020. Task 1 of the project was to conduct a pre-project training, as I mentioned previously. So this training was conducted for potential contractors, and here we introduced the BMD concept that was needed for us to feel confident when these sections with GTR were placed. We proceed with the explanation of the BMD specifications they had to comply with. So that was a one-day training that took place here at NCAT, and several people from different contractors, ADEM, and some other rubber suppliers were actually here during this training. For task 2, we conduct the BMD design with the GTR. In this case, the contractor that was selected provided us with an Alabama approved mix design that was the control mix and also raw materials. So we work on developing a dry GTR optimized mix design that met the criteria that I presented previously. In this case, we are assuming a low traffic since these are mostly local roads and state parks parking area in some instances. So in this case, we're using the criteria of having an ideal CT of 55 and a hot IDT of 20 PSI. In task 3, we monitor the production and construction of the section. So every time we build one of these projects, we have NCAT staff monitoring the activities. You have to realize here that some of these projects may be constructed over several weeks. So we typically are there only for one visit, where once again, we visit the plant. We don't have any control on how the mixes are placed, but we document all these activities, and we also sample some of the plant mix for BMD verification. So once again, once we gather the mix, this is just an example to verify compliance with BMD. When we went to Coffee County, we sampled some of this mix and we run the plant mix, and we didn't really have any issues for that particular project to meet that BMD criteria. Here I'm showing the results that we got when that mix was sampled for ideal CT. We got a 74.5, way above what was required, and hot IDT strength 24.5, also within the requirements for plant produced mix. The evaluation, as I mentioned, we are looking at the long-term performance of these projects. So every contract we are setting it up. So we will be conducting 6 visits once per year. What we typically do, we are using our automated payment condition survey car or vehicle when we can use it. To be able to use this device or this equipment, we need to be traveling a certain speed. So in those instances, in certain state parks where you cannot travel at the speed that you are required to travel, we are conducting visual surveys for those projects. So once again, we've been during construction of each of these projects that I listed previously, things to keep in mind, as I mentioned previously, since you're going to be adding the fibers during production, you're going to be you are required to use a special metering system to feed the rubber at the asphalt plant, and the way you do it is similarly to what you will be doing if you were adding wrap through the wrap collar that you have there. In terms of construction, I think all the projects had run relatively smooth, no issues during production or construction. And once again, we document those activities as part of the evaluation as well. So this is a brief update on how these projects are doing. The project in Coffee County that was built in 2020 is the oldest, as I mentioned. The length of the project was about 6 miles. And again, we have a more detailed information about how the projects are doing, but just to give you kind of an overall status, we have identified very low severity, less than 1% cracking, but keep in mind that this is a long test section that we have there. So less cracks than what we have currently in the control section. Lake Guntersville, 11 miles long. We identified in the latest survey a couple of isolated cracks, but again, very low severity, and we will continue monitoring this cracking development there. The Soto State Park, those two projects were built in the same year. The Soto State Park is actually the parking lot area that was paved, and isolated cracks have been identified in a couple of spots, but again, very low severity. Only probably somebody with a lot of experience doing this survey in some instances will be able to detect these cracks. The Joe Wheeler project is about 4.4 miles. And again, 0.1% is what was presented in the last report, very low severity for the ground tire rubber section, no cracks detected at this point in the control section. The most recent one, Lake Yahoo, 0.4 miles, that's the length of the project, no cracks up to this point. St. Clair project, 2.5 miles, no cracks in either the control or the GTR section. The Lake Lorelyn, as I mentioned previously, was built this year, so no monitoring has taken place, and we are hoping we're going to be building one more project here, right less than a mile from our facility here at NCAT in the Chewacla State Park. Briefly, I'm going to talk, this is what we are doing with ADEM, the collaboration we have with ADEM on those projects. But I also wanted to point out a research that Nathan briefly mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, research that we are doing currently related with GTR. So in the 2024 cycle that we are on right now, we have new rubber sections. So Arkansas is sponsoring one using pre-swell dry GTR. And the goal here is to look at ways to mitigate reflective cracking from rubberized concrete. And this is a gap-graded mix. South Carolina is also sponsoring another section. This is an SMA mix with dry ground tire rubber. And their goal here is to see if they can implement ground tire rubber to replace a polymer modified binder, and at the same time get rid of cellulose fibers with the addition of the ground tire rubber. Virginia DOT is also using a dry GTR dense graded mix and comparing the performance of this section with an SBS mix. We also have sections that were placed in the previous cycle, in the 2021 cycle. We have the Oklahoma DOT section that Nathan mentioned with dry ground tire rubber. And then the goal for Oklahoma was also to mitigate reflective cracking. And then the additive group experiment that is still in place with dried and wet GTR technologies. So if you look at the locations, as Nathan mentioned, currently, which is exciting to me, we have 6 GTR sections at the pavement test track. In terms of performance so far, for the 2021 cycle, the Oklahoma section so far has shown better performance than the control SBS section. The additive group sections, we show that these sections have cracked before the control SBS, but the cracks have remained relatively tight despite the cracking that had developed. The dry GTR sections from 2024, looking here at Arkansas, South Carolina, Virginia, are showing excellent performance after more than 5 million e-cells in place. And then the South Carolina and Virginia section, not rotting, in this case with not rotting and minimal cracking experience so far. I will try to provide my concluding remarks, what the work we are doing related with GTR, the advances that we see these days in dry process technologies and BMD interests have helped address some of the historical barriers that we have for GTR implementation. Several demonstration projects with GTR have shown that GTR with dry technologies can be designed, produced, and construct using a BMD framework. So some of the limitations can be overcome with this approach. Field projects across Alabama have shown promising early performance with limited distress observed to date. Ongoing monitoring of these sections and the research that we are currently being conducting here at NCAT, we're hoping will continue to provide very valuable data to support implementation and specification development. And finally, I think it's important to point out that collaboration among agencies, industry, and research organizations is essential for expanding the successful implementation and use of GTR in asphalt payments. So I hope I didn't take too long, but that's what I have. If you have questions, we will be glad to discuss them with you.
Thank you, Carolina.
That was perfect, Carolina.
Yeah, that was great. So yeah, just some final recommendations. Adam discussed there's quite a few opportunities to utilize waste tire materials. He mentioned mulch, cement kiln fuel, trails, walking tracks, but asphalt, right? And I thought that was really helpful to see them paired up and talk about all those jobs in Alabama. Widespread adoption, though, of dry GTR is still really not, I don't think we're there yet. There are states like Georgia DOT, which have actually allowed them in their specification. And I think that may be a really good topic for a future webinar to have our friends from GDOT on to talk about how does this look like? How does writing a modern specification for this material, what does that look like? What are the things that you have to cut or modify? Because it's hard on the dry rubber, it can be really difficult to capture the benefit of that unless you use a more modern spec. And I thought Carolyn did a great job talking about balanced mix design, which is a really good option. It's not our friends in Georgia don't do it that way. I think they have a unique other way to do it. But balanced mix design is a good option for adopting dry ground tire rubber. And Carolina did a really good job explaining how we got the thresholds that we have recommended to ADEM and the state on how to do that. I personally attended and helped in the training on a couple of those projects that Carolina was describing, and focused training on the differences and what you can expect when working with dry GTR is really helpful, and it benefits users from the very beginning. It helps them understand, set expectations. It helps them set the plan up correctly. It helps their lab folks, be prepared for possible changes. I talked a little bit about how volumetrics will change whenever you start using rubber. So I thought that was a good point from Carolina. Having good feeder, Carolina only briefly mentioned this, but having good feeder machine logs will helps ensure that you have the right amount of rubber for the total project. And then also if you were to pair that up with balanced mix design during production, that makes sure your performance goals are met. If I was writing a spec, that's how I would do it. Is tying those two things together. Um, Carolina did a good job of showing the performance of these different. Carolina, I think I counted 10, maybe it was nine different projects throughout state parks in Alabama and parking lots and things like that related to the ADEM project uh, that can produce high quality asphalt mixes. And then we talked about the test track with there being five of them, and really four of the five have demonstrated really high performance. And it's interesting. The one that did not demonstrate high performance has other sections that we've used in the past without rubber with similar distresses have fallen apart and had to be completely replaced and rehabilitated. And yet this one we've got a lot of cracks, but they're really tight, and that rubber is obviously doing something in influencing performance. Then one more point, and you guys probably know what it is because it's the most important one. Don't say RTR, it's GTR. And
I like that one.
I knew that one was
anyway, I do
coming.
want to thank Carolina and Adam. That was really it was really informative, and I know we've got a couple questions coming into the chat. So, Travis, you want to MC our Q&A?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think one of the first ones that came in, I think is a really good one there is has GTR been used in OGFC type mixes? And so I think that's a great one to throw Carolina's way, but I also see that Cliff Thinking House from South Carolina has weighed in on that, which I appreciate you doing that, Cliff. But Carolina, take it away.
We we've done wet of GFC for many years. They were used very successfully in Alabama. And we did here at the test track. That was before my time, but we did look into OGFC, but using wet or terminal blended rubber. We haven't done any dry rubber open grade friction course yet.
So Carolina, I know you did your study in Arizona. Did you get involved with any of that Arizona rubber there? I guess that was all wet terminal blend.
All wet asphalt rubber. So that's a specific product, and um, it was very successful for several years. They are not using it that much anymore.
Mhm.
But back in the days, very, very successful.
Okay, great. Adam, this next one's for you here, and it does come from Cliff in South Carolina, is how are you guys able to track to make sure that the tires are actually coming from Alabama? And what kind of guarantee do you have that they didn't come from Tennessee or Georgia or Florida, if you will?
Yeah, we have a manifest system. So from the point of generation through transportation, through all the way to final end use and process is tracked
Mhm.
through that system.
Okay, so essentially that's coming from where the tire was removed from the vehicle.
Yeah, the point of generation is generally going to be your little tire stores and facilities,
Okay.
Walmarts and such as that.
Okay, so some of these big producers that are grinding tires that they take from all over the place that are in their process, do they fall into that kind of manifest process as well? Are you getting certifications from them?
Yes, we sure do. That manifest system is
Yeah.
also handled through their permit and our registrations.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Here's one from Aaron Swartz. Let's see. The drop in the reported tons among several states since 2020 on Carolina's slide may also be due to environmental concerns, water and air quality with the use of ground tire rubber here. Um, has Alabama had those concerns and have they addressed them? Adam?
Um, that let's see, mainly, because there hadn't been many of the projects is literally just the cost. We don't have the funding. As
Okay.
far as the testing and such, no, we have not done any of those types of tests.
Okay. Great. Great. And then our good friend Jay that's in Hawaii. He's got a couple questions in here. I like the one that he has was the BMD philosophy used for formulating the mix designs for these projects that you've been looking at. Carolina, that one's yours, I believe.
Well, the way we've been doing this, since we typically want to have a control section, we start with that control approved Alabama DOT mix as a starting point. And typically we have to tweak either adding, changing the GTR dosage, which is not that common, but we pretty much have to do the balance mix. But what we start with an existing mix design, and then we just add the rubber to make it compliant with BMD testing.
Okay. And then I think I want to add in there too that most of these projects are having the BMD testing done during production as well. Is that right, Carolina?
We at least we are there. We are not there to monitor. It's not our job to be looking at a QC every day, but we do a random day and we sample mix and we come back here and test it. Yes, we do.
Okay, Nathan, jump in there about that Coffee County job because I know you and I got to visit the plant when that was going on.
Yeah, I'll reiterate what Carolina's saying. It's, in the project we had with ADEM or have with ADEM, yeah, we're not going for quality assurance or quality control, but we do sort of have a spot check, and it's really there, or it's typically early on in the project just to make sure that contractors feel comfortable with the feeding equipment, with laboratory changes, to mix designs or to testing. Really, when we did this, or when I was involved, balanced mix design was still pretty early,
Hmm.
especially at a production setting. And so a lot of the questions were really more about BMD testing than they were about rubber. And then when you added rubber on top, it made it just a little more complex. I'm going to actually go back in the chat. So Frank Jaster had a comment about working for TxDOT when they put uh,
Hmm.
wet, GTR process asphalt in San Antonio, and they saw the rebound and expansion, and he said it led to failures. And then he has some other comments in there about doing like a OGFC like, or maybe it's like an ultra thin mix that performed well. I will just sort of piggyback a little bit off of that because his final comment is that overall I think it works well in asphalt, but it does require proper design and selection. I agree with that. We have dropped in just to kind of taken a mix design and drop rubber in before, and it's worked. But I think a better approach would be to use the rubber and actually maybe modify the gradation a little bit to make some room for that rubber. Rubber's about I think it's 2.5, 3 times less dense than rock. So 1% of rubber is going to take up 3%, 3 times the amount of volume that 1% of rock will. And if you increase these numbers higher, eventually that will have an effect on your on if volume effective binder and things like that. I'm not saying it can't be done. It absolutely can be done, but fundamentals still apply.
Well, and I love that conversation too. That when you're using, especially this dry process, that you've got to make sure that you do your replacement in the mix by volume, not by weight. Otherwise, you end up with way too much rubber.
I agree with that, except I'm going to modify. It's not necessarily too much rubber, but you don't really have the gradation that you think you have. You
Yeah,
don't have the volumes you think you have, and it could be too
yeah,
much. But
yeah,
I think it maybe a better way of saying it is it's not optimized.
yeah. So by volume is the correct way to do it.
I agree. I mean,
Yeah,
absolutely. You're
yeah,
blending golf balls and ping pong balls, and they're totally different densities.
yeah. Yep. Yep. Good. And I think that, another question that had come up there is, what about using former GTR mixes in wrap, as far as going from there? And I think one of those was answered by Frank's comment that they had milled up a project that they had learned some lessons from and used it into that OGFC like mix later and found great performance. Carolina or Nathan, do you guys want to weigh in on that?
So using the mill GTR
Correct.
section, or
Correct.
just add it, or just use the GTR with
Mill.
No, wrap from
From,
GTR
yeah.
pavement.
we
I
haven't
said
done
that
it,
they
but we
learned.
probably can do it, Nathan, next time
I
with the
said that
Well,
they
mill.
learned some things from because it sounds, I think he used the word failure. I was trying to be more optimistic. They learned some things from that job.
I would say some of this is anecdotal, some of this is intuition. I don't have hand first person experience with this, but I do know to, especially as you move backwards in time, not all rubber is the same, and the
Yeah.
process swelling processes are different, and it kind of like it's maybe it's similar like with asphalt binder absorption into aggregate that wrap is not you don't really have that problem anymore because that process is a one-way process and it's already occurred and you can't really undo binder absorption in wrap. Maybe it's like that where whatever changes in rubber, especially in the early days of using rubber,
Mhm.
uh once you had it in the wrap, it was kind of inert at that point. I'm not totally sure, but I do know people can use this stuff in wrap. Um, one of the final bits of the additive group experiment that we're going to do is when we mill up these surfaces that have rubber in it, wet and dry. We also have some plastic. Is we will collect that wrap and do some testing on that wrap just to kind of provide guidance on recyclability of modified mixes. I don't anticipate there really being any issue at all. Um, Especially if if in a double barrel drum where that wrap is never going to encounter the flame, and so it's not like that rubber is going to burn up. That's a little bit of intuition and a hunch.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Adam, another question that we had in here is, we've got folks from all over the country and certainly well beyond from there. How can they reach out? How can they find their program that's similar to the scrap tire program that we have here in Alabama, to seek, potentially funding, whether this is an agency that would like to figure out how to use it or a contractor that sees the value in helping others understand what they can gain from these programs.
Yeah, you basically want to reach out to whatever state environmental agency there is for your state. Most do have some type of grant and or potential help with the recycling of tire material. But I wouldn't have one specific way to get that information.
Now, are you able to interact with other states' scrap tire programs and their administrators and so forth?
Only a handful, generally states adjacent to us. We've worked with those in the past, just dealing with mainly tire problems and such.
Okay, I was wondering if there was a community of those folks that leaned on each other and lessons learned from each other. Because I know Carolina and I have done some work with the folks in Georgia,
Okay.
um, with the what is it, the Ray Bass Foundation, I believe, over there. So, so another one in here I want to make sure we hit and we catch was how sensitive are the performance results to small changes or large changes in the dosing of the GTR. Caroline, I think that one's squarely in your court.
The way we are doing this, and I think the only time Nathan actually was the one doing this, the optimization of rubber is not the most common thing to do. Typically, suppliers for dense graded mixes will have a recommendation of the amount of rubber they would like to see. If you change to a gap graded or SMA, probably the recommendation is different, but we try to tweak other things. In most cases, to be honest, we started with an approved BMD, approved mix design from Alabama, and we didn't have a lot of a hard time to meet the BMD criteria. In some instances, we have to reduce the amount of wrap to meet the criteria or to make adjustments to the AC content.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of work where we try to optimize or tweak uh, rubber content. Normally, you want to use if you're doing it, you want to use as much as you can,
But
and
you
we
don't want
take
to
the
be going
recommendation.
away from that range that is not recommended.
That's
Typically
right.
you may actually drop it a little bit, but you don't wanna that would be a lot of lab work that will have to take place. So it typically is
Yeah.
easier just to adjust either
Jay,
wrap.
we may have data on that, but I'm trying to go back into my memory
You
to
did that for the Smart Mix, for the
and we
Coffee
varied
County.
and we varied Smart Mix.
A little bit. Yep.
Okay. Well, Jay, if you want to send me an email, I'll dig that data up. If you're curious, let me know. If you want me to do that, let me know.
What about cost differences? Are we seeing a cost difference? Carolina, do you know, is it more expensive, less expensive?
That's the big question that unfortunately we don't have all
Yeah.
the data to, expensive in terms of what original initial cost. Yeah, probably you're gonna have to put the binder, but the goal is that eventually the performance of the ground tile rubber is gonna be superior to conventional mixes that we put down once you balance that mix and you get the extended benefit. But at this point is something that I cannot quantify.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say I agree. If you're comparing to conventional mix, conventional meaning unmodified binders, it's going to be more expensive. But with the hope here is that you get longer life, which ends up paying for itself. We really, as fundamental of a concept as that is, it's real. It's still I think we could all do better to understand that extending the life of a payment an extra year is worth a couple, is worth a dollar or two a ton or whatever the cost ends up being. Our friend Josh Bragg from GDOT, he might have some information on the cost difference on dry GTR compared to polymer modified mixes. I do think you've got some cost savings there. Um, because that's what they're doing in Georgia is they're allowing GTR, dry GTR in lieu of polymer modified binders.
Mhm.
That is
Great.
correct, Nathan. Yeah,
Thank you,
we are.
Josh.
It
I
is it is a cost savings for the contractor to use GTR. So
Okay, great. I think that sounds like a great topic for us to have on another one of these implementation webinars later this year. What do you think, Nathan?
Agreed.
Cool. And then
Agreed.
I see somebody bounced in here and gave us a great resource. It looks like the American Association of, or let's say Association of State and Territorial Solid Waste Management Officials. I bounced into the website right there. Real quick off the top, I didn't see something about the tire programs, but I imagine it's in there would be a great resource. So we've almost got a quarter after, Nathan. Let's close this down.
Yep. All right. I was looking at the website and I need to go back to my slides. All right. So yeah, if you want to learn anything more, are you seeing my slides,
Yep.
Travis? Okay.
Yep.
If you want to know more about anything, test track related work or trainings or reports that we've written, feel free to visit us on our website. You can go to the test track and you can read all the way back to the original test track, from the year 2000. Training opportunities, Travis is always looking for opportunities to increase the knowledge of across the board, whether you're brand new to the industry or you're a seasoned veteran in the industry. Travis, I think a really good topic would be uh, the value of life extension
Oh,
for
there you go.
asphalt pavements. I think
That'd
that's
be
something
great.
that I think all of us would do well to better understand that up front. As we start to change, I'm preaching a little bit, but as we start to change, mix designs and mixes will be a little bit more expensive, possibly the value you will reap that value and more in the future. So that's my
Yeah.
suggestion for a training topic for you.
Love it.
We on the topic of expensive mixes, join us next month. We will be talking about high polymer asphalt mixes. These have been around for a while, but many of you are probably aware of what our friends in Utah started doing a few years ago, but really that's kind of taken the asphalt industry by storm. And so we're going to be talking about that in a month, next July. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for attending, and we will see you next month.